podcast. You're listening to the Premier Rockets podcast. It's H-Town Hoops, hosted by Brandon Scott and Adam Spolane.
It is the H-Town Hoops podcast. Brandon Scott here with Adam Spolane, Austin Mendez producing this thing for us. And a lot has happened since the last time we talked. Last time we talked, the Rockets had just won a series of really close games. Since the last time we talked, they've gone on a 6-game losing streak. They broke the losing streak. You had the trade deadline, which I know, Spo, you were around for and were able to weigh in on. Luka Doncic got traded. Like, so many things have happened since the last time that we talked, and we're going to get into all of it. But I want to start here, Adam. I know that, of course, the Rockets won their most recent game against the Raptors on Sunday. But before that, they had lost 6 straight. And even with this game against the Raptors, it's not like they set the world on fire. It's not like it was the most impressive game that they played or the most impressive opponent that they played. They'll take all of the wins that they can get. But I want to ask, like, is this something, the way that the Rockets have been playing as of late, do you feel like this is something that we were warned about, something that we could have seen coming even before the losing streak, based off of some of the conversations we were having a couple of weeks ago about them not necessarily playing the exact same way that got them here with the defense? And of course, a lot of this has to do with injury. But what do you make of the most recent play from the Rockets? And do you feel like there were some warning signs about this coming?
I think we talked about it after like the 20-game mark when they were 14-6 or whatever, and they were on pace to win more than 50 games. And I think you asked me, is this real? And I said, probably not, just because they had played a pretty easy schedule and they had an incredible amount of injury luck. And guess what? The schedule got tougher. They had to start playing a bunch of back-to-backs, and they got to play a bunch more back-to-backs here coming up. And then a bunch of guys got hurt. And when you lose, multiple starters for a bunch of different, 6-7 games at a time, whatever it's been, you're going to lose some games. And that's really what has happened now. I mean, they've been without Jabari Smith for a month and a half, and, Jabari doesn't put up the biggest numbers in the world, but I think you're starting to feel his impact not being on the floor. So you're without him for a long time, and then you lose Sengun, and then you lose Van Vliet. You're going to feel that. So I think that you're not going to get through a full NBA season without hitting some sort of a rough patch. It is impossible. I don't care how good your team is. The 65-17 Rockets from 2018 lost 5 in a row at one point. Like, you're going to hit that stumbling block. It's just a matter of when. And so, no, I don't think that this is a big surprise that it has happened. I think, though, the reasons are pretty obvious. They have not defended at a high enough level here since Jabari Smith got hurt. I went through the numbers last week. When Jabari got hurt, they were second in defense. At the time when I put it out, I think it was on Friday, they were 19th in defense, from the time when he got hurt to last Friday. So they've taken a hit on that end of the floor. They have obviously taken a hit when it comes to keeping guys on the floor. And you just hope that you can just kind of stay above water for these 2 games before the All-Star break. You get to the break, and then you hope that you get healthy coming out of the break, and you hope you stay healthy.
Yeah, I've gone back and forth on, like, how much of this, what we're seeing from them as of late, how much of it do I attribute to the injuries and how much of it do I attribute to actual regression of play. And I'm interested to get your thoughts on it, because I think it is a fair mix of both. You actually just did a pretty good job of laying that out, how they have had this attrition issue, how they have had this injury issue, but also it does not feel like they're playing with the same, and look, not having some of your key guys out there has a lot to do with that. Not having Jabari Smith Jr. out there, I think, has a lot to do with it. But the defense hasn't been the same. None of it has been the same. And like I found myself like disappointed at times with like the effort. And I know Ime Udoka, I don't know if it's a little bit of him just trying to light a fire under the team, or if he actually really believes that the effort is not there. But you can talk to him and hear from him where he, you'll have different nights where he's talking about this is our worst loss, or basically the softest team and things like that. And that to me passes the eye test at times in some of these games. I'm interested to see, what do you think of that? How much of this is strictly on the injuries? Like, is the injuries having the residual effect, or is it actually a regression in how they're playing?
I think it's both. I don't think. I mean, they were at one point after they won the Atlanta game. They were on pace to win 57 games. Like, I don't think that this was a 57 win team. I don't think that this was a team that was probably going to finish second in the West. It was pretty remarkable the position that they were in. So I think some of it is just regression to the talent that they have and just kind of the youth that they still have. I think some of it is regression to, hey, depth is great until you have to use it. And that's kind of a something that you hear all the time. Like, it's great to have, these guys at the end of your bench, 11, 12, 13, 14. But if you're having to rely on them night after night after night after night, you're probably going to be in trouble. And that's kind of what they've run into here over the last week or so. And then I don't think the energy and the effort has been what it was at the start of the year. And I think some of it is just the minutes start to pile up. And you look, I think that Dylan Brooks and Amen Thompson have kind of fallen off a little bit defensively. Part of that is they're having to do a whole lot more than they're used to doing. Dylan Brooks is playing close to 33 minutes a game. That's a career high. Amen Thompson, before Jabari Smith got hurt, Amen Thompson was playing 29 minutes a game. When Thompson was in the starting lineup last year after Sengun got hurt, he was playing around 29 minutes a game. Since Jabari Smith has gotten hurt, Amen Thompson is playing 39 minutes a game. And they're asking him to do a whole lot more than they've ever asked him to do before. And I do think that no matter how young you are and how great a shape you're in, when you're doing that at an NBA schedule and playing back-to-backs and playing, 4 games in 7 nights and 5 games in 7 nights, and you're, jumping on plane after plane after plane, it takes a toll. And I think that you're starting to feel that now. I think that this team really needs the All-Star break, probably more than most teams. Just having the last couple of days off will help. But getting 8 days off for the All-Star break is exactly what this group needs right now.
All right, so I'm glad you mentioned Amen Thompson, because that's where I wanted to go next. Amen Thompson has cooled down a little bit. When he first got inserted into the starting lineup with Jabari Smith being out, I mean, he was just playing at such a rate, at such a pace that it was really taking the league by storm. We were even having a conversation about him becoming their best player, or seeming like their best player. If not already, then probably sometime soon. I would still buy stock in that. I would still make that bet that he'll be, if he's not their best player already, because he's so well rounded, that at some point he will be. But it has not looked that way as of late. He has cooled down. It doesn't sound like you're worried. From what I'm hearing, it sounds like you're attributing it more to, fatigue and just him playing minutes, the number of minutes that he's never played before. But I also feel like this stretch has really highlighted, and these are things that we already knew about his game, some things that needed to develop, the shot itself, the shot creation. He's a dynamic athlete and a really smart player, but there are aspects of his game that need to develop. I feel like there's a little bit of both of these things happening. Like, there are parts of his game that are being exposed for not being fully developed yet, or anywhere close. But then also the part that you mentioned, that he's being asked to do a lot more. What would you pinpoint the Amen Thompson regression to? Is it just the minutes, or is the league sort of, kind of that cliche, the league's figuring the guy out sort of thing?
No, it's both. It's absolutely both. Teams are spending a whole lot more time talking about Amen Thompson now than they were before the season started, or when they're spending much more time talking about him now than they were 2 months ago. And that's just because his role has increased. And when you're scouting teams, you start to notice, hey, this guy's a whole lot more involved than he was before. We should spend some time with, looking at him, in the scouting meeting. And when we're doing film, we're going to spend a whole lot more time on him than maybe we were before, because he's just going to be more of a factor on the floor. So it's like it's like in baseball, the number 3 hitter gets talked about a whole lot more than the number 8 hitter. Well, Amen Thompson has kind of gone from being, in a sense, the number 8 hitter to now he's the number 3 hitter. So he's at the top of the page when it comes to that scouting report. So so teams are far more, they know his game far better than they did 2 months ago. And that's part of the adjustment that you have to make as a young player in this league. You can have that burst, but once you have that burst, you better be able to adjust when teams start to take your strengths away.
Yeah, and he's 100% going to have to do that. I will say though, he's one of the ones that I feel like it would be an exception on the whole effort thing and that not being there. I still feel like on a night in, night out basis that I'm watching Amen Thompson give 100%. When he had 10 rebounds the other night, even though the shooting is not consistent and is not always there, I still feel like you're getting the essence of what Amen Thompson is and the reason why he's such a dynamic player and is as able to do as many things as he's able to do. There's just got to be some development there. And I think that's going to come with time. I also think that it helps having all the pieces around, like the full complement of pieces that made Amen Thompson what he was during this early stretch. Having Sengun out there, having Fred VanVleet's presence to keep everything sort of calm. And look, I'm out there looking and I'm trying to think like who is their point guard out there when they're rocking with, they go with a double big lineup where they're out there with, a backcourt of Amen Thompson, Jalen Green, and Dylan Brooks. And then you're like, okay, so those are the guards. Who's the point guard? Who's supposed to be kind of setting everything up and allowing, Amen Thompson to do what he does best right now, which is cut and be an athlete and offensive rebound and things like that. And of course, where Jalen Green doesn't have to have the ball in his hand as much as he has. Like I think that's part of it as well. Is not having those players around has also impacted Amen Thompson's game.
Well, I always hear from people, oh, they got to bench Jalen Green or they got to bench Fred VanVleet. That's the guy who's got to be the odd man out. They got to trade him. They got to get Fred VanVleet off my team. And then you see him miss a week and you see how it looks when he's not out there. And I think it's the last week has been a very friendly reminder of how important Fred VanVleet is to this team. I think on Sunday, you saw Thompson try to run the offense and it didn't really work out. When they started to make their comeback and take the lead in the fourth quarter, it was Jalen Green getting to the rim, setting guys up. I think that's when the offense really started to take a turn for the better. But yeah, this has been a good week for Fred. Fred VanVleet hasn't played in a week, but this has been a good week for him. And when you get to the negotiating table in July, he's gonna remind Rafael, hey, remember that week when
and it happened last year too. It happened last year too for a small stretch when he wasn't around. So let me ask you this, since you mentioned Fred. What we got to do to get some respect on Fred VanVleet name out here, man? Because to me, it seems like Fred is a maddening player for Rockets fans it's double-sided. On the one end, you can't really function all that well without him. And then on the other end, it seems like there is a pushback on how reliant the Rockets are on him, right? Like, it's like, why does Fred have the ball late? And why does he have the ball so much? And it's like, well, they kind of need him to. And then when he's gone, you're like, well, damn, you don't have him. What do we got to do to get – and I wonder what it is. Why is it because he's not very tall? Because he doesn't necessarily look like your prototypical NBA player? The age, the money that he was paid? I'm trying to figure it out. Why can't we get the appropriate level of respect on Fred VanVleet's name?
The one that I get all the time is, well, why is it that he's the one guy who never gets benched? You bench Sengun, you bench Jabari, you bench Brooks, you bench Jalen. How come VanVleet is the one guy that is immune to ever being benched? And again, part of it is you don't notice it in the box score. And I think if you are the type of person who sums up a player's game to his shooting numbers, then hey, you're not going to like Fred VanVleet, because Fred VanVleet is not going to be the most efficient offensive player in the world. If you're going to harp on shot selection when he's the one getting the grenades at the end of the shot clock, hey, you're not going to be a big Fred VanVleet fan. But if you're watching the games and you're seeing how these games develop when he is out on the floor and what happens when he's not on the floor, and if you talk to people around that team, they will tell you his importance. And, just going back to earlier in the season, Alperen Sengun repeatedly called Fred VanVleet the team's brain, and they started last year. I think they started last year 0-5 in the games where he didn't play. They wound up 3-6. They were 1-6, and then they won 2 games at the end of last year when Portland and the Clippers weren't trying to win. And they won their first 2 games without VanVleet this year. And I remember I asked Sengun about this. I said, hey, is that important for you that you were able to win these 2 games when Fred wasn't out there? And the first thing Sengun said to me is, one of those games was against Washington, right? So, like, even they kind of understand that they are still very, very reliant on what VanVleet brings, because there's nobody else that can do it. And you're seeing it now. They don't have another point guard really on this roster at this point. I guess Amin Thompson is the closest thing to that right now. Maybe, I mean, Aaron Holiday has started there the last couple of games, but Reed Shepherd clearly isn't ready to take over that mantle at this point. And so you are going to see Fred VanVleet out there. Fred VanVleet is probably going to lead the team in minutes or be right up there. And every fourth quarter, he is going to be out there. As long as Ime Udoka is the coach and as long as Fred VanVleet is healthy, until somebody overtakes him for that position, this is his team. This is his offense.
I just can't believe that somebody would fix their mouths to say, and clearly it's just a misunderstanding. Like, why doesn't Fred VanVleet get benched? I mean, it's just a clear numbers game and a clear personnel thing. Like, every other guy in the starting lineup, there is somebody that you could play for them, that you could argue for. Hey, if this guy's not in the lineup, hey, well, this guy off the bench could, in theory, play their role, even if they're not the same exact kind of player. They can do this other person's job. Fred's job and Fred's role is the only one that they don't have anybody on the team that can replicate.
Yes.
Like, and so that's the simple reason for why he can't and won't be benched. I would say that I do think it's a reasonable frustration or like thought to think, hey, I wouldn't mind if they just had I want them to have a point guard that they rely on and they believe in, but either one or two things. They either want a better version of Fred VanVleet or to have that thing that we're talking about that they don't. Somebody that can come in and spell him. So, like, you don't have either one as an option. You're not upgrading from Fred VanVleet, especially with the trade deadline pass and everything. You're not upgrading from him. And then again, you don't have anybody else on the team that can do what he does. That to me is for better and worse. For better or worse, and for better and worse. Like, so some of those shots that we're talking about that you were mentioning can be really, really frustrating, I would imagine, for the fan base watching and thinking, well, why is it that Fred VanVleet is taking that shot? And the simple fact is it's because you need him to. And it also, it kind of feels a little bit ungrateful to me too, man, because if you're a Rockets fan and you're frustrated with Fred VanVleet, because his presence here is not just Ime Udoka, but Fred VanVleet's presence here is directly tied to this turnaround that we've been watching over the last season and a half or so. Like, they are just not the version of the Rockets. They are not the Rockets team that you and I discuss on a regular basis now. They are not that version of this team without him. So it's like, hey, suck it up, Buttercup.
Well, you remember the Memphis game a couple weeks ago?
Yeah.
They're down 1 last play, and it's Amin Thompson who gets the inbounds pass. And his drive got cut off by Brandon Clark, and he gives the ball up to VanVleet, and VanVleet winds up having to take the 3 at the buzzer, which would have, won the game. And the number of people that blamed VanVleet for that possession shutting down was off the charts when it had nothing to do with him. That possession was about Amin Thompson not being more aggressive with the ball and then giving the ball to VanVleet and expecting him to try and make some sort of a play with 5 seconds left. And all really that he could do at that point was take the 3, because he looked in the lane and he saw 4 guys standing there waiting for him. So you can't go drive the ball into the lane unless you want to take a 20-foot floater. So you take the set shot, and he could have drove and kicked, but you're going to kick the ball to Tate. The other option would have been Tari Eason in the corner, but Santi Aldama is standing right there. He's standing right there in the passing lane waiting for him. So all VanVleet could do was take that shot. Obviously, he missed the shot. He's the one that gets ripped. And I asked Udoka about this very play a couple days later. He's like, no, that's on Amin. Amen needed to be more aggressive there. Amen needed to have confidence in his ability to be able to take Brandon Clark off the dribble to get to the rim. And that's kind of where the youth comes into this team, where it's like, okay, things aren't going exactly the way that we want them to go, but we have Fred here to bail us out. And that's kind of what Van Vliet's job is to bail everyone out. It's a thankless job, but that's what he's here for, and he's really good at it.
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned that play, because that's a great example, because I can remember that night. Everyone was either mad at Fred or they were mad at Ime Udoka, because they're like, man, you can't draw up a better play than that at the end of the game. That's your play. And of course, like you mentioned, Fred, because he took the shot. All the while, mind you, as they say, it was Amen Thompson who, like we mentioned, should have been more aggressive. But I've said this, I've thought this for a while, and this is why I'm glad you brought that up, because it applies to Amen Thompson in this case, but I've applied it to Jalen Green over the course of the last year and change since Fred VanVleet has been here, and we've heard people be frustrated with how much Fred has the ball. You want less Fred VanVleet? You want to be less reliant on Fred VanVleet? Look at your young guards. Like, and it's not a knock, but it's like, they have to develop into that role. If they were able to take on a larger role in handling the ball, in setting up the offense, in taking last second shots at the end of the game down the stretch. If they were better and more equipped at those things, or if it was a feeling that you could trust those guys in those moments and in those situations a little bit more, then you wouldn't be as reliant on Fred VanVleet. And of course, both of those guys still very young. I'm talking about Amen Thompson and Jalen Green specifically here in this instance. But both guys still really young, figuring it out. The hope is that eventually they will arrive at a place from being around Fred, from having better coaching with Ime Udoka, from playing in more meaningful games, which they obviously have been and we anticipate will further on into this season. You get those guys in a better position where they can handle those moments, and you will gradually see less Fred VanVleet. But for as long as they're still sort of figuring it out, like you mentioned, as long as the youth is still a factor in the way that it is, you're going to need Fred VanVleet in all sorts of moments like this.
I think they were hoping that Reed Sheppard would not take over, but he would at least soak up some of the minutes. And obviously, he's just not ready for it at this point. And the idea that Reed Sheppard is going to play a big role on this team for at least the rest of this season moving forward seems highly, highly unlikely. But obviously, I think you go into next year hoping that Reed Sheppard can take some of the load off VanVleet. I think that they would love to be able to get VanVleet into that 32 minutes, 32 minutes as opposed to the 36 to 38. But they got to have somebody, they got to have an option for that. And right now, you're seeing it here the last week, and you're going to see it for these next two games. They just don't have that right now. And when your offense is out of whack, you're turning the ball over. Guess what? You're turning the ball over. That's leading to transition offense for the opposition. And so this team that had such a good half-court defense, you don't get the half-court defense at all because you're turning the ball over. And then defensively, he knows where to be. He knows where to be in the right spot. And then offensively, I haven't looked at the numbers just to see what they look like. But, I mean, you saw Sunday's game. I mean, Sunday's game is as ugly as it gets. And listen, it's the second game of a back-to-back, whatever. But it was bad. And some of that is just kind of having a directionless offense because you don't have an experienced point guard out there. So I think that's been a little bit of an issue for this team the last few years is finding that second point guard. The last Silas here is supposed to be Dacian Nix, and Dacian Nix just had no shot at being able to fill that role, and they didn't go out and get anybody else to help the team out with that. I think this year they wanted it to be Sheppard, and Sheppard's just not ready on either end of the floor for that.
But is it? I hear you, but is it I don't, because to me it's almost sounding like lost. I don't feel like it should be a lost cause though. Like I feel like they still need to play Sheppard, and maybe I'm being a little bit too pie in the sky there because they are playing for something. These games matter. They're going to be in the playoffs. They don't really have time. It's not like 2 years ago or 3 years ago where they could just throw guys out there and let them develop and kind of sink or swim and figure it out. I understand the circumstances are different and you don't want to do that. But I do feel like his development ultimately is important, whether it's in that backup role to Fred VanVleet or ultimately taking on that mantle, like ultimately being that player one day. Like, and I figure you draft him number 3 overall, you expect him to be something like that. Like, I don't know, how would you play this? Do you think it's worth it to still let him go out there and trial and error this thing, even if he's not necessarily the best option? Even like, let's say, even if Aaron Holiday is a better play, maybe you let Reed Shepherd go out there as long as he's not hurting you, if it's helping him develop a little bit.
That's the problem, though. He's hurting them. And yeah. I was kind of in that same mode of, hey, just give him 16 minutes. Just tell him, hey, you're going to get 8 minutes in the first half, 8 minutes in the second half. Let's see what you got. And let's see if you have come along, in the last couple of months. And then you've seen them do that. And it really, it looks, and Ime said this after that Brooklyn home game, basically looks the same. And, offensively, everything is just moving so fast for him. And the speed of an NBA defense and just kind of the length that you have to deal with as a shooter in this league, like he's you can tell it's moving fast for him. So that's been a problem. And then obviously we all knew defensively he would struggle, especially early. Teams are attacking him. Teams see him on the floor. They are going to involve him in everything. And he holds up, he fights, and he doesn't just give up on that end of the floor, but he's just overmatched right now. And so I'm fine with them continuing to throw him out there because I do think that it's important. I do think that it's important for him to understand the areas where he needs to get better. And you're only going to be able to do that on an NBA floor. But at the same time, they're playing for something. This isn't a tryout camp. This isn't, we're playing for ping pong balls. You have a whole team here that's trying to get to the playoffs. And if he is going to hurt your chances at doing that as a coach, you can't play him. You just can't do it. You can't do that to the rest of the team that's going out there and playing their asses off for you. So, like, if you have 14 guys going out there and playing their asses off, and you all have this goal of, trying to get to the playoffs and trying to do some damage in the playoffs, you can't let the one guy hold you back. Now, I don't think that Shepherd would ever really necessarily hold them back to that degree, but it just, to me, what I have seen, and like I said, I was with you with, hey, throw him out there, throw him into the fire, and let's see what he can do. But as you've seen it here, it's just not, it's not good enough right now. I'm not giving up on the guy. I think that it would be crazy to do that at this point, just understanding the skill set that he has. But it'll be a big summer for him coming up. He's got to really get in the weight room and get stronger. And then he's got to allow the NBA game to slow down a little bit for him. So it's not a lost cause for the rest of the season. Hey, maybe he figures it out. Maybe that shot starts to fall. Maybe the game starts to slow down for him at that end of the floor. There's nothing that you're going to be able to do about his defense the rest of this season. That's just how it is at this point. He's not going to get significantly stronger here over the next 2 months, but maybe he is able to make some shots here, and maybe he's able to impact the game somehow in that way. But right now, it's hard for me to see him taking some sort of a leap to where he's actually going to be able to help you this season.
All right. Speaking of not giving up on somebody and them not being a lost cause, but it also not necessarily being good enough, I want to get to Jalen Green here because I feel like this guy has improved. I feel like he has arrived in a space where, at least for me, this is how I'm speaking for myself here, where I'm no longer like waffling about his future with the team. Do you keep him? Do you trade him for a star? I'm in on Jalen Green. I'm in on Jalen Green with the Rockets. I also would understand if over the summer if they were to deal him for a star. That's down the road though, and of course they got all of those Phoenix picks and everything like that. But as we sit here right now, and this is going to be, they're going to have a run here. They're going to make the playoffs, and we'll see what it's all about. But whatever they do, sink or swim, Jalen Green is going to be a big part of it. But I do feel like I'm reaching a point, Adam, of acceptance of just what Jalen Green might be as a player, which is look, when I say acceptance, it makes it sound like, man, like it's a bad thing. But like he is a really, really, really good basketball player, a dynamic basketball player. But sometimes the jumper's broken, the shot selection's not great, and he'll be a high volume scorer who'll do it in inefficient ways. And I feel like, with the exception of a game or two here, over this last stretch, he has been that volume guy who has been, for the most part, inefficient. I forget, was it either 28 on 22 shots or something like that? I'm thinking about in the Minnesota game. Like there are a couple of examples here recently where it's like, man, you look at it and Jalen's getting his points, but the shot selection seems like it's going the other way, or at least not great. That could have something to do with the fact that Sengun hasn't been out there the whole time, and Fred VanVleet's not out there to calm things down, and defenses are giving a little bit more attention to Amen Thompson, and so maybe Jalen feels like the green light is there. I don't know. It could be a number of different things. But for me, I'm just reaching a point of, hey, accepting that this guy might not be the most efficient on a night in, night out basis, but he can get you a bucket, and he does things that are different from a lot of other people, from most people on the basketball court. Do you feel like that's a fair assessment with Jalen Green? Like maybe this is just maybe 20-something on 20-something shots just is who he is from time to time.
No, I think that he can be efficient. You're seeing the 3-point shooting get better. And I think the big thing, and we've talked about this a lot over the years, is just the free throws. And I'm looking at the last 5 games, free throw attempts, 4, 2, 10, 1, 2.
Yeah.
It's not like this is a guy who doesn't try to get to the rim. He just has trouble getting calls. And I'm not going to put that all on refs, or he's being poorly officiated, but it does feel like he could be the beneficiary of getting just a few more calls. And if that starts to change, if he starts to get a little bit more respect from officials, then all of a sudden, the games where he's averaging 8 free throws a game instead of 4. And that's a big deal. Like when you shoot, around, let's see, he's 85% from the free throw line. When you're shooting 85% from the free throw line and you're getting 8 attempts a game, I mean, that's 7 points right there. And then all of a sudden you are a whole lot more efficient as a scorer than you are when you're getting 4. And so this is a guy 2 years ago who averaged 6 free throws a game. So you know that he can do that. It's just a matter of, can he start to get those calls? Can he continue to drive to the rim? But the fact that he's having his highest volume 3-point shooting season of his career, and he's also having the best 3-point shooting season of his career. Again, it's not great. It's 35%. It's not great, but hey,
I'll take it. Hey, you'll take it from what he was doing before, for sure. It's a lot better.
It's better. And so if he's continuing to get better from that part of the floor. So if he's at 35%, and really he's probably closer to 38% over the last couple of months. So if you can do that over the course of a full season, then guess what? That's a really good 3-point shooter, especially when you're shooting it at a high volume. So I think that there is certainly a world where he can be more of an efficient scorer. Let me just go through the game log here, because really his season started to turn in December, would you say?
Yep.
So let's go December 1st through the last 33 games. He's at 23 points a game on 18 shots. And again, the free throw is only 4. So if you get that to, let's say you get that to 6 free throw attempts instead of 4 free throw attempts, then you're basically at 24, 25 points a game on 18 shots. That's pretty good, especially when you consider still how young he is. He's still got a lot. He can obviously get stronger. There's a lot of areas where his game can grow. And I will always come back to this quote from Rafael Stone last year. He has a skill set that cannot be replicated on our roster. And you see that night in and night out. The ability to get to the rim is something that they really aren't able to do. And so that's why you can't quit him. No matter what.
No, absolutely not. I'm glad, and I prefaced everything I said with that. Like, I am not quit Jalen Green. Like he showed enough, honestly, in December, and I'm glad you mentioned the free throws too, because that's a big part of this. Like, even so, I was in New Orleans for the Minnesota game. I watched most of it, but by the end of it, I realized I'm like, man, 28 points on 22 shots. Like, this is not good. But then I saw 10 free throw attempts, which has been, like, as you pointed out, that's the outlier for him, the 10 free throw attempts. But that shows and speaks to the level of aggressiveness and, of course, the you could call it the favorable whistle, or just the fact that he's getting the calls in that particular game. But it ain't got to be 10. It could be 6, like you mentioned. But it does need to be more than 4. Like you mentioned, the 3-point shooting is a lot better. You would like to see somebody with his skill set and his ability to get downhill and pretty much get past. And it's hard to stay in front of this guy. You would expect, and the athlete that he is at the rim, challenging at the rim, and he's gotten so much better at that than, say, from his first couple of years of not being that great of a finisher for as good of an athlete as he is. I think he's a much better finisher now. He just needs to obviously get those calls and do more from the free throw line, like you mentioned. But it is rough to watch, like the guy who you feel like he's got it in there. It should be there, but it's just something is just not clicking. Whether it's the free not getting to the free throw line, or just not having the cast of guys around him and being expected to do so much more as he has been over the last couple of weeks.
I mean, James Harden wasn't like the most efficient shooter or anything like that. He was a 45% shooter from the field, mid 30s from the 3-point line. But what made him an efficient scorer was his ability to get to the free throw line. When you're taking 12 free throws a game and you're shooting more, better than 80% from the free throw line, you're going to be a whole lot more efficient of a scorer, and you're not going to have as many empty possessions. So if he can get to the line a little bit more, if he can continue to shoot the ball better as he has this season, then you're going to see incremental improvement there. And you've got the next 20-something games for him to do that this year. Plus, you hope that, if you're the Rockets, you really want to see him in the playoffs. You want to see how that looks in the postseason, and can the talent really take over in the playoffs? Because, once you get to postseason, and a team is, when you're in the regular season, teams aren't able to really prepare for you that much, because you might catch a team on a back-to-back. You might catch a team, when they might have just, one day to prepare for you. They don't get to see a lot of you. But when you play a team in a series and they're just focused on you for 2 straight weeks, they take away everything. They know everything about you, and that's where talent really stands out. That's where the talent really takes over. And so is Green's talent enough to where when you face a team 6-7 straight games, can that talent take over against a team that knows everything that you're going to do?
Yeah, I think the answer is yes. I do. Talent-wise, I think the answer is yes. He's still got to do some things to prove himself to make me right on that. But talent-wise, I think the answer is yes. I want to say one more thing about Jalen Green before we move on to the injury updates. I want to make this point, because I've seen this be a bit of a conversation, like who's going to get the ball at the end of games, who's taking their last shot. Ime Udoka's talked a little bit about it being, something, and we talked about it as well, how it could change from night to night, game to game. It could be a different guy. And they got a few okay to decent to okay candidates to do that, between Fred and, of course, Jalen Green, Amen Thompson. They've drawn up plays for at the end of games. Of course, Alperen Sengun is the centerpiece of their offense. But I just want to say this. I want the ball in Jalen Green's hands at the end of the game. That's where I'm at. I'm the one that just got done criticizing them for being inefficient at times and, having an inconsistent jump shot. And here we are talking about how he doesn't get to the free throw line as much as he probably should. And even with all of that, at the end of the game, this team, the players on this team, and Amen Thompson, I think, is on his way to being their best player. Sengun is their best player right now. Fred VanVleet is probably their most reliable player and their smartest player, as Sengun calls him, the brain of the team, the brain of the offense, certainly, but the brain of the team. I don't trust anybody to get a bucket in the way that I do Jalen Green. Anybody's ability. Let me change that. I don't trust anybody's ability to get a bucket on this team the way I trust Jalen Green's. So at the end of the game, and I ain't coaching the team, this is just me giving my opinion. At the end of the game, if I ruled the world, Adam Spolane, the ball, and Jalen Green is out there and healthy and available, the ball is going to him at the end of the game. That's how I feel about
I don't think there's any doubt that he's their most talented scorer. I don't think when you, in terms of like ceiling when it comes to providing offense, he is number one on that list. And I don't know if number two is all that close at this point. I think from a talent standpoint, he is without question their best scorer. It's just a matter of, does he want it? And at times I've always kind of felt like, oh, he looks a little iffy, so does he want it? And can he execute when they give him those opportunities? I'm glad you did bring up, though, that kind of late game hierarchy thing that's people have made a little bit of a big deal of here over the last couple of weeks, because it reminds me of where Udoka came from. And Udoka spent all that time in San Antonio, where it's Parker, Ginobili, and Duncan, and then Leonard. And like, it wasn't just one guy getting the last look every single game. Like, you spread it around because you force the defense to have to think about multiple things. So like, I don't think that it's been that big a deal that they don't like have they don't have that Anthony Edwards that they can just go to every single possession. I don't think that, first of all, it's kind of reminds me of a Dusty Baker thing from a couple of years ago when people were asking him about who's going to play center field for them. And he's like, man, I wish I had a Julio Rodriguez I could plug in there every day. I don't have that. Like, I'm sure Ime Udoka would love to have an Anthony Edwards. He doesn't have that. So you spread the ball around a little bit. And I think that it's worked for them. And they've played well in close games for most of the season. And guess what? You're probably not going to run the table in close games. Like, they're close games. They're coin flip games a lot of times. Sometimes it's based on a call. Sometimes it's based on, whether or not the ball hits a certain part of the rim. And, like, so you don't want to be in those positions because the games get left up to chance a lot. But guess what? They've handled themselves pretty good in those types of situations, running the offense the way that they've run it. So I don't think, for me personally, I don't think that they need to be the team that says, okay, possession after possession after possession after possession, the ball is going here, everybody else clear out and let that guy go to work.
Yeah, I actually, and I think we both have been complimentary of the way that they've done it so far. I think for me, this whole Jalen Green thing and him just being the answer to this debate is just me wanting him to grab his role by the reins, like his rightful place. Like, as you just mentioned, Adam, he is by a mile their most talented scorer, certainly from the perimeter, but I think their most talented scorer, the most talented offensive player. And I think it is important at some point for him to reveal himself as that, right? Like, to not just like, I don't think a player that good, that talented should just sort of be blending in and sort of just like playing a role at the end of the game. Like, the way you just described it, like, sure, Ime Udoka would like to have an Anthony Edwards type that you can just give the ball to and say, hey, this is my closer, and he doesn't have that right now. I guess the point that I'm making here is that I'm looking at Jalen Green like, let's become that player. Let's, like, not necessarily let's be Anthony Edwards, but let's be like that. Let's leave it let's not leave it to chance. Let's leave no doubt on, who is the bucket around here? Who's the bucket getter around here? When you need one, it's great to have options. I actually love the fact that the way you describe it, like, they can make the defense have to think about who the ball is going to, where is the ball going to go here, because they got enough good options. I like that element. But I also want there to be a best option. And I feel like there is one, and that he should be it. This is not a criticism necessarily of Jalen Green. This is kind of just acknowledging the evolution of a young player and how he just has to grow into that role. And sometimes it takes some players longer than it takes others. But I'm looking out for that. As we have some of these silly debates online about who should be closing the game, I am in the back of my head thinking, there seems to be like a really clear answer to this question that everybody's asking, or a very clear solution to this problem that everybody has sort of more so created in their heads. than actually exist on the court. But as far as it does exist, this guy should be the answer, if that makes sense. Like, if there is a question on this hierarchy, this guy should be the one that takes the top spot. Even if Amen Thompson becomes their best player, even if Alperen Sengun is the one that they're running the offense out, running the offense through, or if Fred VanVleet is the brain, Jalen Green, bucket getter, should be his role to me.
Or sometimes you just go based on matchup. And it's like, hey, if the best defender is going to be on this guy, then maybe we don't attack the best defender. How about that?
Fair enough. Alperen Sengun, you were there at practice / shoot around. We actually call that practice. Shoot around is before the game. We actually call this practice, right? Am I getting that right? So you were at practice, got an Alperen Sengun update, left the Raptors game the other night with a back injury, has been banged up a little bit over the last couple of weeks or so. What did you hear? Like, let me ask it this way. How bad do you think how injured or banged up is Sengun right now? And how much do you feel like it is impacting him out there on the court?
So what happened Sunday had nothing to do with any other injury that he might be dealing with. This was basically a spasm from him trying to do a little spin move early in the game on Sunday. That's really all that it was. And they believe he was doing better today. He did take part in, they don't practice hard or anything like that, especially when you're kind of at the portion of the schedule that they're in. But he was able to participate. They'll see how he feels tomorrow at shoot-around, and then they'll go from there. So it sounds like there's a pretty good chance that he plays, but we'll have to wait and see on that. I do think that he's been banged up this season. He's talked about his shoulder. I have heard that he has had some back stuff that has crept up on him this season. Obviously he's coming off of a pretty serious ankle injury from last year. You're going to get banged up. Hey, welcome to the NBA. Welcome to playing 82 games in the NBA when you're the focal point of a team. I think it's probably affected him a little bit. I think when you look at the inefficiency as a scorer, it's funny. He's an all-star this year. He was much better last year than he was this year, at least on the offensive end of the floor. I do think that some of the health stuff has probably impacted him a little bit, but he wants to play. They're not going to play him if he can't play. They're not going to play him if he's not healthy enough to play. It's kind of been the same thing with Jalen Green. Jalen Green's dealing with a whole bunch of stuff also. He plays every game. He does his work in the trainer's room. The trainer's room, the trainer gives him the okay to play every game. He's out there. That's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to clock in for work every single game. It's kind of been lost on players here over the last decade or so. But, there was a time when John Stockton would be in his late 30s and he would play every game. It didn't matter if it was a back-to-back. He was out there all 82. Karl Malone, go look at how many games Karl Malone missed over the course of his career. It's like 8 games total for up until he got to the Lakers that last year. Like, you're supposed to play. This is what you're paid to do. You're paid to play basketball. I remember James Harden would demand to play every single night, even when he wasn't feeling great. They're basketball players. They want to go out there and compete. And so if Sengun feels good enough to be able to do that, he's going to do it. It sounds like things are trending towards him being able to play against Phoenix. I would want to play against, whatever bigs Phoenix is going with every single night if I were him, because that's a great opportunity to put up some numbers against that team. So if I'm him, I would expect that he plays tomorrow.
Yeah. So I only mentioned, and I mentioned it because he's Alperen Sengun. He's their all-star. He's their best player. So we should talk about him if there is a news item to talk about as it relates to him. But also just for me, and this is just, kind of an eye test thing. There's not a number to support this or anything. Just from watching him, he seems to like, and I want to differentiate too between energy and effort. I think that they can be synonymous, but not necessarily. But some days it seems like he's out there dragging ass, and it's not because his effort's not there. It feels like his energy's not there. What was the game? Was it one of the? I'm trying to remember that game. You can remember he had his all-time, one of his best defensive games recently, where you're just like, man, I cannot believe that he's getting after it on the defensive end like this. And, we had kind of grown accustomed to him not being a very good defensive player. And this year, he's improved so much on that end, but it seems like it's dependent on how well he's feeling. And like some nights it's not an effort thing, but I don't feel like I always get the energy from Sengun on a night in and night out basis. And that's what made me think about the injury. And you talk about a back, and of course you mentioned the ankle from last year, and all of these just lingering knick-knack injuries. I wonder, and look, nobody does feel their best every night, but with Sengun, for whatever reason, it just has felt more pronounced to me because I can like just watch and tell the difference in how he's defending on a night in, night out basis.
I do think there are times when he's looked tired. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I do think that there are times this season when he's looked tired. His minutes are down slightly this year. That's something I kind of talked about with Udoka a couple of weeks ago. But yeah, I think that that's going to happen though. Like when you are the focal point of a team, you got to kind of carry the team on your back a little bit. And guess what? You're going to get a little fatigued. So I don't think that that's necessarily something to be concerned about. But yeah, there have been times, I think, this season when he has looked tired, although he has been better late in games this year than he has been in the past. In the past, he would be really good early, and then he would fade as the game would go on. This season, it kind of feels like he plays himself into games, and that's something that he has said Fred VanVleet has really like. VanVleet will harp on him at halftime, like, hey, we need you to wake up. And then he plays a really good second half. So he's just got to, I don't think it's that big a deal, but yeah, I don't think you're wrong. And really quick, Karl Malone played 18 years for the Jazz. Do you know how many games he missed in 18 seasons?
11.
Are you looking at that?
I'm not.
Yes, it was exactly 11.
Well, hey, no, I swear to God. I was going to say 8 because you said 8 before, but I just went with 11. Yeah, I had no idea, honestly.
He missed 11 games in 18 years with Utah, and that's just regular season. He missed 40 games in 1 year with the Lakers. So he goes to the Lakers. And remember, it was a whole lot tougher back then than it is now. They were flying commercial when he first got into the league. They were playing more back-to-backs when he got into the league. He played that 1 year, that lockout year, the 50 games, when at times they were playing back-to-back nights, and he played 49 of 50 in that year. And this is like late 30s. This is 39-year-old Karl Malone started 81 games in 2003. Like, that's wild when you think about it. 11 games in 18 years that man missed. Plus, they played he played 100 and let's see. He played 172 playoff games for the Jazz also. That's a lot of basketball.
See, the Rockets got all of these players that's born in 2002 and even more recent than that now. Nobody talks about them being kind of underrated old school like Jalen Green, not necessarily associated with old school, but who would have thunk it? The dude does not miss work. Dude comes to work. He does not miss work, and I can appreciate and respect it. Speaking of going to work, all right, I want to get to Jabari Smith Jr. as well, because correct me if I'm wrong. The way I saw the reporting from you guys that were there today is that pretty much everybody practiced except Jabari Smith Jr., but after the All-Star break, it's anticipated that he'll rejoin practice. Correct me wherever I'm wrong on that.
VanVleet didn't practice today either.
Okay.
The hope is that because Jabari's been doing some work on the floor before games, but he hasn't been cleared for contact drills. So the hope is that he'll be cleared for contact during the break. And as soon as he's cleared, then it should not be long before he can get back into games. I think the big thing will just be about conditioning more than anything else. So it does seem like there is a chance. I don't know if he would be able to return like right after the All-Star break, because that's in a week. I don't think that's probably asking a little bit too much, but it doesn't sound like he'll need a whole lot longer than that if he's cleared for contact. So it seems like the hand is obviously getting healthier, and they're just waiting for that bone to, I guess, get 100%. And then Fred VanVleet, it does sound like he will be able to return once they return from the All-Star break. So he'll miss these 2 games against Phoenix and the Warriors. And but then I think the hope is that he would be able to return for whoever they play coming out of the break. I think it might be Minnesota.
How badly do they need Jabari back? We were kind of hitting on this earlier on in the show, but Like what would it mean for the team to get him back, and how important is it for them to kind of get things back going right to have Jabari out there? Like it's been easy to sort of dismiss him because of Thompson's ascension and the fact that Jabari just is not one of those world beaters setting the world on fire with all of the stats and everything. But he's got a very important utility to this team, and I feel like they could really benefit from him coming back.
Well, they get bigger. I think that's the big thing. They are a smallish team without him. You look at who they are starting, at the forward, it's what 6'8" Amen Thompson and 6'7" or whatever Dillon Brooks is. Like those are two smallish guys. Dillon Brooks is not a really good rebounder. You lose rebounding when you don't have Jabari Smith, and that's one of the areas that Udoka specifically brought up as something that they have really missed without Jabari over the last 6 weeks or so, is that you lose a rebounding presence there. Also, their rotations have just been, I think they've just been a little bit off because you are moving guys around into spots where they normally aren't. So like when you don't have Van Vliet, then all of a sudden it means that you already have Amen Thompson in the starting lineup. So now you have to dip into that bench a little bit more. And I don't know if that's something that they want to continue to do. They obviously had a ton of success earlier this season, bringing Eason and Thompson off the bench together. Obviously, you haven't been able to do that for the last 6 weeks. And, you might not be able to do that once Jabari comes back, but you will have a much better player who will be able to check in with Eason once Jabari does come back. So their rotations will become a little bit more sound. They will get some more size. They will have another option to play at center. I think they've been missing that, not having that small ball five. That's something that I think has really been lacking. But again, you also get one of your best players back. And I know he doesn't fill up the stat sheet. He's never probably going to be an all-star. He's never going to put up all-star type numbers, but you don't understand the impact that he has on a game until he's not there.
Yeah. And I mean, I would just point out the shooting, that, the shooting has not materialized in a way I think most of us were anticipating it would when he's a prospect. He's coming out of Auburn, but still got to respect him as a shooter, and he still stretches the floor, I think, in a way that certainly none of the rest of their bigs do, right? Like they certainly don't have a big that can shoot as well as him. So that's part of it too. They get bigger, the small ball five, but also the five that can stretch the floor, which and let's just be honest, they don't have a lot of dudes, period, guard or otherwise, guard, big or otherwise, that stretches the floor, that shoots threes, that is a threat from that level of the floor. And he is, like even if it's not as good as you thought it was going to be, he can knock down a three, he can knock down a shot, and he's a fairly, I think, if not reliable, just respectable jump shooter. Like you're not just going to leave him open. And I think that part of it matters too.
Yeah, he's 35.5% from three, and that's been trending upward. So, yeah, it's obviously somebody that you at least have to think about from that part of the floor. Whereas, Amen Thompson being in the starting lineup, that's not somebody that you're necessarily worried about there. So you add an extra shooter. Listen, I think Amen Thompson will probably wind up staying in the starting lineup for the rest of the time that he's with the Rockets. Yeah. But it does give you better, we talked about it. I think it'll probably be Dillon Brooks who comes off the bench for them when Jabari does come back. But hey, bringing in Dillon Brooks and Tari Eason together as just two guys that can wreak havoc on a game defensively, that makes you a better team than when it's Eason coming into the game with Jayshawn Tate or somebody else like that. And then there are obviously Eason's not playing back-to-backs right now. So like just getting those guys back, getting those guys healthy, it helps. And depth is great until you have to use it. And they are really having to reach deep into their depth right now, and it's hurt.
Well, and as we were getting at earlier, like, Dillon Brooks' minutes, like, I feel like his minutes could stand to come down a bit. You put him in a bench role, you put Jabari out there, assuming that the conditioning is where you want it to be, young guy. Like, I feel like you get a better version, or you can get a better version of Dillon Brooks if he's playing fewer minutes.
No question. Hey, Dillon, here's 25 minutes. You have 6 fouls. Go have fun.
Yeah.
that's a good role for him. And I do think that his defense has maybe fallen off just a tad because they're asking him to play a little bit more than he's used to, and because he can't foul as much because he needs to be out on the floor. But if you're at the point where you have the 6 fouls to give, you have 25 minutes in which to give them, go have fun, go be physical, go piss some people off, and he's really good at that.
All right, we've reached pretty much to the end of the time here, but I did want to get this in because we have not talked since the Luka Doncic trade, man. I ended up in New Orleans for Super Bowl, Meteor Row stuff, and then of course we had the trade deadline itself. But the Luka Doncic trade, and especially now that we've had enough time to reflect, it's been a week plus, and we've had enough time to reflect. And it's funny, it's been over a week now, and both of the guys that are the centerpieces of this trade, Luka Doncic on one side and Anthony Davis on the other, have played exactly one game apiece. Exactly. And of course, we know the story with Anthony Davis because that game was against the Rockets, and Anthony Davis was the quintessential Anthony Davis experience. Like, just all world great, just amazing out there. And then, of course, he gets hurt and he's not able to finish the game. And who knows how long he's going to be out. But now that we've had time to sit on it and we've had time to watch both of these guys play one game apiece with their respective new teams, what did you make of, or what do you make of the Luka Doncic trade to the Lakers? And of course, I don't want to be disrespectful about this and act like Anthony Davis wasn't traded. I feel like there's a lot of that going on, and I want to be on the right side of history here and clearly like staking my claim. And Anthony Davis is amazing, in case that needed to be said. But Luka Doncic to the Lakers, Anthony Davis to the Dallas Mavericks.
I when it was made, I was a little higher on it for Dallas than a lot of people were, just because of how good Anthony Davis is. But it's still not something that I would have done just because they didn't get enough back. And like, if you're going to make that sort of a trade, you have to get every single asset that the Lakers have. I don't care how good of a player Anthony Davis is. And Anthony Davis is an elite player when he's on the floor, and he's actually been healthier than Luka the last couple of years. I mean, he played 76 games last year, and then, of course, and he had only missed, I think, maybe 5 or 6 games this year, and then he gets hurt coming right out the gates with Dallas. So that's my first thing is, okay, I get why you made the trade. I get why you might not be totally sold on Luka moving forward. I don't necessarily agree with it, but you know more about him than I do. But you got to get a whole lot more. Like, you got to get Dalton Connect. You got to get that extra pick. The fact that the Lakers were able to swing another trade, that kind of tells you that, hey, you got to get all that stuff from them, because it hurts you moving forward, because that 29 pick probably isn't going to be that great when you consider that they just got Luka Doncic and you gave them stuff left over to add more pieces. So that's one area where they really failed. The other, and I didn't realize it at the time, that organization seems to really just be imploding at this point. And you look at how
the Mavericks, you mean?
Yes. You look at the aftermath and you look at how they've handled everything since. As someone who doesn't live in Dallas, I did not know the impact that Luka Doncic had on that fan base. And I did not understand just what that trade would do to that fan base. But that fan base is done with that team.
Dude, how could they not be? Adam, come on, man. The dude is 25 years old, has already taken them to the finals. Like, Luka, again, has only taken them to the finals, not won a finals, but he's right there next to Dirk's status already. Like, yeah. Before the trade, he was already in the pantheon right there with Dirk. Like, and I think it was a lot of it had to do with not just what he had already done for them, but for what they all assumed he was going to do for them in the future. Adam, like, he was the biggest in a city that has the Cowboys. Luka Doncic was the biggest star, I think. Like, I think Luka Doncic was, and it's maybe hard to say in a football state and they have the Cowboys, but I mean, Luka Doncic, I think, is better at his job than anybody on the Cowboys, save for maybe Micah Parsons. Like, he was that big, like, able to captivate a football town that has the Cowboys, man. Like, no, man, this was they maybe you didn't see it coming. Maybe the rest of the world didn't see it coming. They would have been fools themselves not to see that coming.
Well, and that's where the Mavs completely underestimated this whole thing. Because listen, I live in a city where Carlos Correa was allowed to walk away and the fan base just kind of shrugged it off. I watched as the Texans just released JJ Watt and the fan base said, hey, that's the right move. They did the right thing by JJ Watt. I watched the Texans let Andre Johnson walk away. And again, these are very different. So I'm not trying to compare the two because of, at least with the two Texans guys with where they were in their careers.
But we've seen stars leave this city
yes.
and the city kind of shrug its shoulders and just move on.
We're about to see another one with Alex Bregman, and the fan base is like, let him go. We're tired of the whole thing. So that's why I personally just wasn't prepared for, and obviously the Mavs weren't, for what the outrage would be. And then the way that they've handled it has just been awful. And for Nico Harrison to sit next to Jason Kidd in Cleveland the next day and answer 3 questions and that's it. Like, no, you can't do it like that. And for the Mavs organization to go all North Korea on this thing at the 2 home games and not show fans on the video board for the first game, and then last night show fans and have a guy mouth fire Nico and have him thrown out of the arena. Like, no, you got to let the fans have their say. Yeah. You have to let the fans say their piece and show their outrage. Like, you owe them that. And at some point, it'll probably die down. It might not, but my guess is at some point it will. And the fact that they have handled it that way and not let the fans have their protests and not let the fans chant fire Nico at home, it's ridiculous. It is utterly ridiculous to handle it that way. You have to let your customers act out. And as long as you don't do it profanely, as long as there's no violence, let them say what they want to say. But to try and hide it, it just looks so utterly ridiculous.
Yeah, I would think if you got the balls to make this move, then you should have the balls to deal with the pushback. Like, to me, it should be the same kind of type of energy. Like, you don't do this move unless you're confident enough and secure enough in yourself that you can just deal with whatever comes of it. But I do want to say this, though, and just where I think we disagree slightly on this. Man, Luke, short of being like a serial killer, like it would have had to have been a felony 1, like killer, sexual assault, like something like that. And obviously, I'm just throwing it out there. Obviously, there's been no association with that, with Luka, no accused of 0 crimes. But I'm telling you, man, he would have to be the criminalist of criminals for me to get rid of him at that age. And I get the whole price thing. I didn't take that angle of it because, I think it's obvious you got to get a haul back for Luka. And it is criminal. It is sports criminal in and of itself that they didn't. But just before we even get that far, we're not trading Luka Doncic, period. Yeah, sure, you could throw something out there that maybe would get me to listen and to be, to at least have a conversation. But by the end of the conversation, if I got Luka Doncic at 25, I'm keeping Luka Doncic at 25. I'm not trading him. It's the damnedest thing to me that, and again, you mentioned the Mavericks know more about Luka than anybody else. They got the information we don't. I don't, certainly. But the guy who just got you to the finals at that age, under those conditions, apparently he don't be in the best shape, as we all know, and he was still able to get you to the finals. What does it look like if the guy, dare I say, matures? I don't know, dare I say, becomes and I understand he's been playing professional ball for a long time. But to me, I didn't see it getting worse before it got better for Luka Doncic at that age, whether that been his actual game, his professionalism, whatever the case may be. To exchange that for Anthony Davis, who, again, I want to acknowledge as a great, all-time great player, but a descending player as opposed to ascending player and what Luka Doncic is, I don't get the logic in that. Even if they had got a haul, which would have been more justifiable, I still wouldn't have got the logic in, hey, let's try to accelerate whatever the hell it is we think we're doing, when really we only got to the finals last year because of, off the strength of Luka anyway, off the strength of this guy that we're trying to get rid of. I don't see how it's good for their present or future, even if Anthony Davis is a dynamic player as we know that he is.
Yeah, I don't know what they know. Still, I could not have done it.
There's going to be a hell of a documentary out there, Adam. There's a hell of a documentary to be made somewhere, man.
But the thing is, there's still not a ton of information about it because of just how out of the blue it was. Like, there's a little bit. There's stuff about, the not being in shape and all that stuff. But that's, for me, that wouldn't be enough. But I'm telling you, if Nico Harrison calls me and says, hey, I'm looking to trade Luka Doncic, would you be interested? The first thing I'm saying to him is, well, why? And then the second thing I'm saying is, well, does he want to be traded? And as soon as that answer is no, then I'm saying, well, what's wrong with him? Why don't you want him? And then I'm hanging up the phone and then I'm just confused because I don't understand why, 270 or not, you would ever want to trade him. So the whole thing has been pretty befuddling. Obviously, there's a whole lot more information that I don't have that maybe would help me inform that, but Nico Harrison has answered 3 questions. So I don't have a whole lot for you, at least in a public setting. I guess he's talked to some, reporters one-on-one, but again, the Mavericks handling it the way that they've handled it has only made it worse. Like, be out front.
Yeah.
Get the owner out there. Get the owner out there who signed off on it. Get the GM who made the trade. And the fact that he trades him to his friend and doesn't shop him around, like, that doesn't help just like the optics of the whole thing either. And yeah. I don't totally fault him for not shopping Luka around, just because as soon as you're not keeping that quiet, like once you start calling multiple teams, it's going to get out there. And then all of a sudden his camp starts to say, hey, you can trade for him, but he's only going to sign here. And then all of a sudden you lose any leverage that you have. So the Mavs had leverage in this whole thing and they didn't use it. They took 20 cents on the dollar, maybe. They did not get everything that the Lakers had. They could have forced the Lakers to take on extra bad contracts. They could have forced the Lakers to give them everything and make them take on some bad money, and they didn't do it. And I guarantee you the Lakers would have done it. I don't think there is any single offer that the Lakers that the Lakers would have turned down. And listen, I guess Rob Pelinka talked them down from Dalton Connect and the 2031 first round pick. But let me tell you, if he's then if I'm Nico Harrison and he says that, okay, I hang up the phone, because at some point Rob Pelinka is going to give that stuff up because it's Luka Doncic, and Rob Pelinka would understand the importance of having somebody like Luka Doncic. He wouldn't have said, okay, now you know what, Dalton Connect and the 2031 first round pick, that's a bridge too far. I'm hanging up the phone. No deal. No, at some point he would have caved on that. And for whatever reason, Nico Harrison wasn't willing to force his friend into doing that, into giving into, I don't know, the whole thing it's just bizarre. And
it's bizarre, man.
I don't know. Like, if I'm Nico Harrison, like, is Rob Pelinka really my friend? I'm looking at that relationship a little bit differently, because my friend just used me to help his situation out in LA. And now I look like the dumbest person in basketball, and I'm a villain in my city.
Yeah. And I've thought back to this too. I've thought that exact thought of, hey, they say, everybody tell us that Rob Pelinka and Nico are friends. I can't tell. I can't tell that Pelinka is the friend to Nico. But like, it's just beyond me. It's beyond me. But the thing I also keep coming back to is like the competition element of this. Like, two friends made this deal, but in Nico's case, it's like, did he forget that they are in competition with the Lakers? Like, and I get maybe he's not scared of the Lakers and they like their team with Anthony Davis, but I'm not giving. If I'm gonna trade Luka Doncic, I'm trading him to the Hawks, the team that drafted him, or I'm trading them to the Hornets. I'm trading them to Boston, but like the Lakers, not even like the Sacramento Kings, the Lakers, like the preeminent franchise in the league and in your conference, the Los Angeles Lakers. You send one of the top 3 players in the game that you have to them. Did he forget that they compete against each other? Like, it's not just two friends doing each other a solid here. You just made the competition better for years to come. For years to come. I don't get it. My heart will never understand it.
Well, I think they went into this, or at least he went into it, knowing that he was going to trade Luka Doncic. And because they don't really have picks to their future has been traded. They have traded all their picks to get Kyrie. They traded their picks at the deadline last year to get PJ Washington and to get Daniel Gafford. So that's not a team that can just like rebuild. So they went into this saying, okay, we got to get the best player possible. And they thought that was Anthony Davis. Like, here's somebody who we think is one of the best players in the league, which Anthony Davis is one of the best players in the league. But Nico Harrison did not take into account the age, which he obviously should have done. And he did not take into account the value that his own guy had. Like, how many GMs in sports ever undervalue their own guys? Like, if anything, it's the other way around. If anything, GMs tend to overvalue their own guys and they ask for way too much. Like, that wasn't the case with this. Or I guess he did ask for more, he accepted less. So that's the whole part of it that I don't understand, is that you have this incredible asset in Luka Doncic, one of the best players in the entire league. I don't care if you think he's fat, or I don't care if you think that he's out of shape, but you should value him much, much, much higher than you actually did. Like, if you want to trade him, go ahead, trade him. That's your call. That's your team. That's a decision that you have to make as a GM. And if you give him the super max and it blows up in your face, then hey, that hurts you. That hurts you moving forward. There are a lot of teams that have given out a lot of bad contracts and it's hard to get out from under them. But if you're going to trade him, then you have to get everything that you can get for him, because that is a rare opportunity to reset things as an organization. The Rockets did that. The Rockets understood that, hey, this team is over. We need to move on from James Harden. They got every single asset that they could have gotten from the Brooklyn Nets. The Nets gave up a lot. The Nets got Irving and they got Durant out of free agency. So they took everything. They took Jared Allen. They took Taurean Prince. They wound up flipping those guys. But they took every single tradable draft pick that Brooklyn had, to the point where Brooklyn could not improve. That was it. That was Brooklyn's team. The Lakers made that trade for a guy 4 or 5 years younger than James Harden, and they still had the ability to improve, even though that's a team that has basically traded every asset imaginable since they got LeBron 7 years ago. So it is just wild to me that they did not try to extract everything they could out of that trade. And listen, Anthony Davis obviously hurt right now, but he's under contract now for a couple of years. Kyrie Irving can opt out after this season. Like, they could be left with Anthony Davis and Max Christie, and that's basically it. And they won't be able to improve themselves in the draft.
Derek Lively.
Yeah, Lively's there too. Thank you. And they've got a few other guys on that roster. Like, that's not a bad roster, but they have hurt themselves to the point to where they really won't be able to improve that much through the draft, because they've given up so many picks to build the roster that they have around Luka Doncic. So it's a dumbfounding decision to A, trade him, and to B, not try to get everything imaginable from the Lakers in order to do so.
That is Adam Spolane. I am Brandon Scott. Austin Mendez is our producer. This is the H-Town Hoops Podcast. Make sure you get the H-Town Hoops Podcast wherever it is that you get your podcast. You can also catch us, the video version, on the Sports Radio 610 YouTube page. Make sure that you subscribe, rate, review, tell a friend. And until next time, y'all be good.